Hey students, welcome to week 6. We're almost about halfway through the semester, and this week we're going to really work on striving toward a complete draft of your process analysis essay. So let's actually talk about your outlines. As you know, the more time and energy that you put into the early drafts of what you're working on, the easier the next step is. So I'm specifically speaking to those of you who really struggle with trying to come up with a full draft of your essay, and you stare at the blank page and you stare at the blank page, and then all of a sudden you realize that you have maybe hours or an hour to write a whole rough draft, and suddenly something comes to you and you start putting words down on a page. A couple of things about this. One is our brains, they tend to be, they will take the path of least resistance. So what I mean by that is our brains aren't willing to work hard until they have to work hard. And sometimes we have to sort of get ourselves into the right headspace in order to do that. I think I've talked to you guys about this before, but there are two hemispheres of the brain, and writing actually takes place in different processes in the two different hemispheres. So on one half of your brain, you have the creative side. You have the side that has lots of energy. If you've ever written an essay the night before it was due or the morning before it's due, that's the creative side of your brain. It can just activate, and it can go, and just get words down on a page. The other half of our brain, which we use for writing, is the editing half. And if you have ever had an essay that was due weeks in advance, and you stared at a blank page and you couldn't find words to go on that page, and you came back and you started typing, and maybe you said, oh, that sentence sucks, or this is stupid, why am I doing this? That's the editor side of your brain sort of shutting down all of your ideas. And it's really hard to work with both of those things happening. And so what I try to do in my composition classes, and actually in my creative writing classes too, is to teach students to actually work with your brain a little bit here and activate the two sides in different points. So that said, if you did not turn in an outline, or if you turned in a pretty crappy draft of your outline, this is now the time for you to pour a bunch of energy into that outline, so that way the rough draft is that much easier. Those of you who already have some pretty kick-ass outlines know that it's a lot easier to write a rough draft when you have kind of a map, a guide to your entire essay. You can see almost every major sentence of the essay just by looking at your outline. So I'm going to make a strong suggestion right now, even if you feel like you have a pretty good outline, to take some time and add to it, maybe jot some notes down for yourself, maybe start to write some connecting sentences in there, or this isn't something you have to turn in. This is just for your own edification here. So that way, again, you'll have an easier time writing your rough draft this week. So if you look here at the right side of the screen, revising the outline. So again, just taking a look at the title. Right, make sure it's capitalized correctly. And if you're thinking to yourself, what does that mean, Vicki? I don't know how to capitalize a title correctly. I can break that down pretty quickly for you. There are three things that we essentially do not capitalize in a title unless they begin or end a title. One are articles, the, a, or an. So if the title of your essay is, the little white donkey, the would be capitalized. But if the word the appears in the middle of your title, then that would not be capitalized. The second thing that's not capitalized unless it begins or ends the title are coordinating conjunctions. So just think of those fanboys, which I've talked about before, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So any of those words would not be capitalized in your title, in the middle of your title. And then the third thing are prepositions. So the prepositions are just, sometimes they're called little words, but essentially what they are, they show a relationship between two objects. So the marker is on the desk. The word on would be a preposition. The girl is in the chair. We sat in the car. The word in is a preposition. So any preposition that is in the middle of your title would not be capitalized as well. So again, that's just sort of a brief rundown of it. Make sure your title underscores the tone of your essay. If you have a funny essay or if you have a pretty serious or heavy essay, you want to make sure that the title reflects that. Look back at your lead-in and your intro. Is it actually captivating, or did you kind of just slap something on there for the outline? Now's your time to change it so that, again, your rough draft can be that much stronger. Again, I would look at tone. If you are trying to establish a pretty serious tone, you want to make sure that it starts from the actual first sentence of your essay. And then the other thing I would look at in your intro is audience. Who is this essay for? Make sure that it's clear. If you are writing a guide for how to break up with a boyfriend you've only had for 6 weeks, right? Make sure that that audience is very, very clear. Again, just so your readers can pick up that essay and clearly see, this is a guide for me, or this is not a guide for me. The third thing I want you to look at when it comes to your outline is the thesis. The thesis should be one sentence. It should be a statement, not a question. And the thesis should tell us exactly what this process is. So if you're giving me a guide on how to, achieve the American dream, the thesis should actually say that explicitly in there. Let's see here. It should also have an opinion built in there, right? And we say opinion, well, I say opinion now, but later I'm going to transition that into sort of our claims when it comes to argumentative essay, but it's kind of an easy way to remember how to build these theses early on. And so I have an example here. Getting fired from Macy's can be easy and enjoyable. The subject in that sentence and that potential thesis is getting fired from Macy's, and the opinion part of that is that it can be easy and enjoyable. And what happens is this thesis is going to now dictate the rest of my essay. Every single step along the way should be 1, easy, and 2, enjoyable. So make sure right now, if you're looking at your outline and you're evaluating whether or not that thesis is going to work for all of your steps, the opinion part of that thesis should actually support all of those topic sentences. So if you have a step for your reader that actually isn't easy or it's not enjoyable, then your thesis doesn't quite work, or you need to change that step. So again, you kind of just need to maybe pause this video if you're actually looking at your outline right now and double check and see like, hey, does my thesis of my process analysis essay work for all of my steps? If you promise your reader that this will be a fun guide, all of those steps should be fun. Second to last here, I would look at all of your steps / topic sentences, right? Make sure you have great transitions. You really want to be able to pull your reader through in a very clear and logical order. Using words like first, second, third are really great. Although you do want to vary that up. You don't want to bore a reader by just every body paragraph starting with the same kind of transition. So let me actually see if I can find the page number in your book where they list transitions. So on beginning on the bottom of page 72 in your textbook, there is a list of common transitional words. So for this particular essay, I would look at page 73 where it says sequence. And these words like first, second, third, finally, in addition, next, these are the transitional words that you'll want to use to move between paragraphs. However, I would also take a look at page 75 where it says using a variety of transitional devices. You do want to vary up those devices. So again, the reader isn't sort of bored with your logic here. First, second, third. You really want to try to sound like that this is interesting as opposed to sort of boring and repetitive. The last thing I do want to mention about revising your outline is for those of you who did not take the time to actually write a specific example, even though I very clearly told you I wanted specific examples in the outline, this is your time to sort of jot down or develop a specific example. This is a really big component of those body paragraphs, is to have an example that your reader can follow or at least use as a way to understand how to complete the step. So this can be a personal example, maybe something you've done, maybe something you've seen a friend or a family member do, or this could be hypothetical. And all that hypothetical really means is that you're making it up. But I would add that this should be a specific and concrete example. So even if it takes you a couple of sentences to explain how someone accomplished this step, go ahead and take the time to do that. This is part of how you're going to develop those body paragraphs. So again, the more time and energy you put into writing those early drafts, the better each and every draft will be. So if you put a lot of time into this rough draft, the final draft is going to be that much better and it's going to be that much easier to write. So I'm going to really give you the strong suggestion here to really spend a lot of time crafting this rough draft. Again, for those of you who've struggled or maybe you did not like the grade that you earned on your description essay, this is the time for you to really shine through, especially because we're going to get a break next week with spring break and you're going to have time to sort of sit with that rough draft. And sure, you can ignore it and pretend that it doesn't exist, or you can really force yourself just maybe even a half an hour a day to look at your essay and kind of plug away and work on it and edit it. The third point I have here is try not to create and edit at the same time. Again, try to separate those processes if you can. And my last point here is try not to bang out a rough draft minutes before it's due, which again, on your first essay, I know that deadline came up fairly quickly, but many of you wrote the rough draft literally an hour before it was due, and it showed because then the final draft was kind of a mess. Okay, so I'm going to show you a really great student example from a few years ago, and this is not perfect. There are some mistakes in here. She doesn't always do exactly everything that I would want, but this is a good draft of an essay. And so she's essentially covering how to flunk out of college. So I'm going to read the essay and kind of sort of stop along the way. And we're just only going to focus on a couple of paragraphs here. But if you like reading student examples because it gives you a good idea of how to write your own essay, you could certainly pause this video and read through the whole essay because I'll be putting up all 4 pages here. So as I read through the first paragraph here, I just want you to think about who would actually need or who wants this process. I also want you to think about what kind of tone does she establish here. Is she being funny? Is she being serious? And how does that tone sort of reach out to the right kind of audience? And then I want you to think about too is how do her sentences and her ideas build on each other? How does she actually get from one idea to the next? So, all right, the title, Becoming an Overachieving Underachiever. So right there you can kind of see a little bit of a tone happening. Because how do you become an overachieving underachiever? An underachiever is someone who doesn't perform. And so someone who doesn't perform but is doing it well. So you can kind of see where she's going with that. Over 1/3 of Americans currently have a college degree. College is hard work and requires perseverance, dedication, and a fair amount of blood, sweat, and tears. Given how difficult and time-consuming it is to receive a college degree, you might believe that flunking out of college is easy. After all you need to do is to not do your homework, not go to class, and fail your test. On the other hand, if you're going to flunk out of college, why not have some fun with the process? Even though flunking out of college can be easy, by putting in some extra effort, it can be enjoyable and an entertaining experience. So, couple of things here. I don't know if you picked up on that, but there's kind of a sarcastic tone here. Essentially, she kind of lays out this idea that like college is really hard and who really wants to do that? It's way easier to flunk out. As you guys know, right, as hardworking college students, many of you have families, you have other jobs, you're taking other classes. It's really, really difficult to get all of that stuff done. So she's kind of being funny and sarcastic in the way of saying, look, you can flunk if you really want to. It's actually really, really easy. However, and this is where she gets to the thesis, and you can see I've kind of parsed it out here a little bit. She's saying even though it's flunking out can be easy, right? And again, that's our subject of this thesis. If a reader puts in some extra effort, it can be enjoyable and entertaining. So there's the opinion part of her essay, right? Every step I am going to evaluate and say, hey, is this enjoyable and is this entertaining? Because you promised me that it would be both things. So again, every step should reflect that thesis there. So this second paragraph, I'll just read it real quickly for you, isn't actually the first step in the essay. It's actually kind of a pre-step, or just kind of a getting started before the process itself starts. So it says, upon enrolling at the college and selecting a full course load of only the most serious subjects, because really, what's the fun of failing ceramics, you will need to attend your classes. The reason you would want to do this and not just stop attending classes is because you run the risk of your teacher just dropping you from the class. While W's or incompletes are still harmful to your academic career, you'll want to rake in those D's and F's to do lasting damage. You'll also want to take as many classes as possible. After all, the higher you aim, the farther you'll fall. So again, you can kind of see there, it's almost like a pre-step. She's just essentially sort of telling the reader, look, you have to take a full course load. You also have to take some serious classes. Don't just try to take some fun classes, because that's not fun to fail out of that. So right down here is our very first step. Your very first day of classes, you'll want to show up prepared with nothing but a pencil. Show up on time so you're not unceremoniously thrown out of your class, and pick the seat you'll occupy for the rest of the semester. Make sure you sit in the professor's line of sight so they can see just what a stellar student you are. This is where the fun begins. So you can see that sentence right there. She sort of transitions from the things you're actually supposed to do, like bring a pencil and sit where your professor can see you, right? And tells us now, here's where we're going to have some fun. Okay. So look here. After 12 years plus kindergarten of having to do everything the teacher says, now is your chance to act out. When the lecture begins, try to look as bored as possible, letting your eyes glaze over like Krispy Kreme donuts fresh off the conveyor belt. Do you see what she did right there? She's just trying to make that detail a little bit more concrete. It's kind of an awkward simile, if you ask me. Eyes glazing over and donuts. I mean, they have the word glaze in common, but they seem to be too different here. But it's kind of funny. Doodle rude pictures on the desk, fall asleep in class, and proceed to snore loudly. If the professor asks you a question, respond with, I don't know. Only contribute to harass your professor with a barrage of pointless questions, but never raise your hand. Instead, interrupt your professor mid-sentence and ask, is this going to be on the test? Professors love that question. As soon as your professor resumes lecturing, ask as to how their lecture is relevant and demand concrete and up-to-date examples. Finally, loudly inquire when the class ends. This is especially effective if the class has barely begun. If the professor begins to answer your question, take out your phone and begin texting, but not sneakily under the desk. Hold it right in front of your face. If the professor asks you to stop, loudly sigh, roll your eyes, and put your phone down. Tell them you wouldn't be texting if their lecture wasn't so boring. You will very quickly become your professor's least favorite pupil. So again, a lot's happening in this paragraph. You can see I started to make a list here of all the sort of mini steps along the way that she's telling us in the paragraph. And look at the difference here. If the writer were to just have all of these mini steps within this one body paragraph, this list would just be very underdeveloped, and the paragraph would kind of be boring. Only bring a pencil, sit where your professor can see you, look bored, doodle on the desk, interrupt with is this going to be on the test, demand relevancies, text, sigh, and roll your eyes. So, and that's just the list of like all the mini steps, but you can see she develops them specifically. She tells a reader, how to look, how to act, where to hold the phone if you text, right? So again, thinking about how to develop those paragraphs in a really specific and concrete way. You can also see that she, again, is continuing on with that tone of being snarky and sarcastic. It's funny, right? And you guys have been students long enough. You know that these are things students actually sometimes do, right? They show up and they are unprepared. They only brought a pencil. They didn't bring their books, or they do interrupt the professor and say, is this going to be on the test? So again, she's kind of making fun of the situation, or of students perhaps who actually do those kinds of things. So I'm just going to read this next paragraph here as we switch to the next page. Once the semester is in full swing, you will undoubtedly be assigned numerous homework assignments. As stated earlier, it would be all too easy to just not do 2 assignments. I think she messed something up there. You'll want to do them, but make sure you do them in such a way that your professor can clearly see that you didn't try. If you are filling out a worksheet, put in the wrong answers that have nothing to do with the class. Make sure your essays never meet the minimum length and are frequently off topic with numerous grammatical and spelling errors. If your professor asks you to write an essay on a book you read in class, write a 1-page summary of Season 4 of Supernatural. If you really want to mess with your professor's head, write an absolutely brilliant essay, just not on the assigned topic. For example, if they ask you to do a research project on different cognitive theories, write an essay on why Lady Macbeth was a cold-hearted shrew who was to blame for Macbeth killing King Duncan. The reason you will go through this extra effort is that by turning in your assignments, you add to your professor's workload by giving them more to grade. This wastes the professor's time and in turn will increase their annoyance with you. So now we're going to begin the step 3. And again, I'm just sort of picking apart a couple of paragraphs in the whole thing, even though I'm reading you the whole thing, just so you can kind of see how she is taking the advice of how to develop this essay and bringing it around to a really good draft. So, there will also be several quizzes, tests, midterms, and finals in your various classes. These are almost always announced in advance, so make sure you come unprepared. On the day of the test, show up late and without the required materials. Once your professor says you can begin the test, announce your need for a pencil, pen, or Scantron. Once you have received the required materials from your irritated classmates, raise your hand and ask your professor, "We get to go home after this, right?" Given that you showed up late without the needed materials, asking this question should get your professor so angry that you will be able to see the veins on their forehead. Once you begin taking the test, proceed to be as distracting to your neighbors as possible, but not so boisterous that you get kicked out of class. Tap your pencil, jiggle your knee, repeatedly mumble incorrect answers to yourself, or hum the Phantom of the Opera opening score. Be sure to mark enough incorrect answers to guarantee an F, but not so many that you get 0 points. You don't want to appear like you're deliberately trying to fail. After an entire semester, you will finally receive the grade you have worked so hard to obtain, a big, shiny F. So again, notice how specific she's being here. She keeps up with that funny tone. And so even though the step 3 is sort of to be unprepared for tests and quizzes, she breaks down all the many things that we can do along the way in order to actually achieve this particular step. So I'm just going to jump over to the conclusion. Conclusions seem to be hard for many people, including myself. I think it's really hard sometimes to get out of an essay and to not repeat exactly what you just told us, right? What you don't want to do is in a short essay like this, and I know some of you are thinking, this isn't short, but in terms of your academic college career, these are short essays. You're going to get to the point next semester in English 1A and you're going to write 7-page or 10-page essays. And don't panic. It should be easier for you the more you go along, right? But that said, you don't really want to repeat everything that you just said. So what she does in her conclusion is, actually I'll just go ahead and read it to you. College is said to be one of the best experiences of people's lives. That usually applies to people who go through all 4 years making friends and graduating, but it can also apply to those who flunk out. Many may flunk out of college, but not everyone will be remembered by their professor as the most annoying student they ever taught. By achieving this goal, you may now point and laugh at your fellow ex-classmates for spending hours upon hours on their homework and studying for finals. After all, you don't need college to work at Burger King. Never stop striving for an imperfection and use the knowledge you've gained from being thrown out of college to become the worst manager Burger King has ever seen. So she does several strategies there. Again, she continues on with that funny tone. She takes a generalization about college, which is said to be one of the best experiences, and she kind of reverses that, right? She says, oh, that's for people who really want to invest, right? She also points out to the reader that those who complete these steps are going to sort of go down in history and their professors and their classmates will remember just how awful they were. She also points out that their classmates spend hundreds of hours sort of pointlessly working on all of their college work. Again, you know that to be true, right? If you want to sort of accomplish the task or complete the class, you do have to spend hundreds of hours working for it. So this is part of what she's doing here is actually saying the opposite. This is how sarcasm works, right? She's actually making fun of people who seem to attempt college in this way, right? Who show up unprepared or who don't do their homework or who act annoying in class. But she's actually really saying the opposite here, right? She also, at the end of this, she gives a little bit of encouragement to the reader, right? Never stop striving, right? For imperfection, right? And she gives them the ultimate goal that goes sort of beyond this essay and beyond college, which is to become the worst Burger King manager. So again, you can just sort of see her strategies here. Take all of this information and apply it to your rough draft. Again, the more time and energy you can put into that rough draft, the better your final draft will be, and the better your grade will be. If you pour a ton of energy into this rough draft, I promise you that final draft will be that much better. So last thing, just to touch base, you do have reading in your textbook. So you're going to read a little bit about thesis. You're going to read some about revision, which is really important. Again, I would take notes on both sections here, but the revision section is really how you're going to apply some of this stuff, perhaps to your outline, but also to your rough draft. You have more reading in the Book of Unknown Americans to complete. Again, I would strongly recommend taking notes. We get introduced to new characters in this section. Some pretty exciting things happen. So again, jot all of that stuff down. You have a quiz to take by Wednesday. Your rough draft for this process analysis essay is going to be due before Thursday. So again, if you can start whittling away at it now, I would even write a paragraph a day, right? That way you can put as much time into it as you can. You do have to respond to 2 rough drafts, so those are peer reviews by Saturday. And then next week is going to be spring break. So we will resume class on March 18th. This does not mean you should not check out and never come back to any of this your reading or your essay. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to do both things, to continue to work on your rough draft, right? Maybe read through those peer reviews over the spring break and maybe try to apply that feedback that you got on your essay to your rough draft, because again, your final draft will be due. Also, if you're behind on the Book of Unknown Americans, or if you want to get ahead, now's a great time to do it. Our third essay that we'll be beginning, which is the compare and contrast, is going to require that you will have finished the Book of Unknown Americans. So for those of you that already know that that's going to be a challenge, you might want to take that time to go ahead and read through that. Okay, great. I will see you guys on the discussion board. If you have any questions, make sure you email me, and take care.